If feeding your dog feels confusing, it is usually because you are being given isolated rules instead of biological framework. One person says avoid chicken, another says feed only one protein, another says raw is the answer, another says prescription food is the safest option. And most owners end up stuck in reaction mode, constantly changing food because on the latest symptom, label, or opinion, based on the latest symptom. And most owners end up stuck in reaction mode, constantly changing food based on the latest symptom, label, or opinion. But long-term health does not come from chasing food rules. It comes from understanding the system. I'm Dr. Ghunaim. My work focuses on veterinary microbiology, immunology, and the biological mechanisms that shapes resilience. And in this video, I want to give you a simple feeding framework that helps you think clearly about your dog's diet long-term, not as a trend, not as a rigid ideology, as a biological system. Because the goal is not to find one magical food. The goal is to feed in a way that supports resilience. And when you understand that, feeding becomes much simpler. Here's the framework. 5 parts. Stable base, structured protein rotation, whole food diversity, avoiding chronic inflammatory load, and watching the dog, not the label. First, stable base. Every resilient system needs stability. That means your dog should have a nutritional foundation that is predictable, well-tolerated, and biologically appropriate. This is not about feeding the same thing forever. It's about having a home base, a starting point, a diet you know your dog does well on. That matters because you cannot build resilience on top of chaos. If your dog is flaring constantly, reacting unpredictably, or dealing with ongoing digestive or skin problems, the first step is not maximum variety. The first step is stability. You need a base that calms noise in the system so you can actually observe what is happening. That base gives you clarity, and clarity is what makes the rest of the framework possible. Second, structured protein rotation. Once your dog is stable, the goal is not to stay narrow forever. The goal is to maintain tolerance. This is where rotation becomes important. A lot of owners make the mistake of finding one food that works and then never changing anything again because they are afraid of disrupting progress. That feels safe, but over time it can create fragility because resilience is not built by permanent overprotection. Because resilience is not built by permanent overprotection, it's maintained through controlled exposure. Protein rotation is one of the simplest ways to do that. Not constant switching, not random variety, structured rotation. That means rotating between a small number of proteins your dog tolerates well. Usually 2 to 4 is enough for most dogs. This helps maintain a broader tolerance window and gives the microbiome more varied inputs over time. So rotation is not there to make feeding exciting. It is there to help keep the system adaptable. Third, whole food diversity. This is where many dogs either gain resilience or slowly lose it, because food is not just fuel. Food is information. It signals to the immune system, the microbiome, the gut lining, and the metabolic system. And diets that are excessively narrow, heavily processed, and biologically repetitive often provide less of a diversity than supporting long-term resilience. That does not mean you need to feed an overwhelming number of ingredients. It means the body benefits from real nutritional variety. That could include different proteins, different whole food components, and different nutrients input over time, introduced in a way the dog can handle. Diversity is not the opposite of stability. Done properly, it is part of stability, because a resilient body is not the one that functions under perfect conditions. A resilient body can handle normal variation without falling apart. A resilient body can handle normal variation without falling apart. Fourth, avoid chronic inflammatory load. This part is less about one bad ingredient and more about the cumulative burden. A dog's system is constantly responding to what is exposed to. Food quality matters. Degree of processing matters. Ingredient burden matters. Repetitive exposure to things the body does not handle well matters. And when that burden builds over time, inflammation often shows up where owners can see it most clearly. Skin, ears, stool, energy, behavior, recurring flare patterns. This is why I do not like reducing feeding decisions to labels like hyperallergenic, premium, or sensitive. Those words often create false confidence. What matters more is whether the diet is helping reduce inflammatory burden or quietly adding to it. That is a much more useful question because the body responds to biology, not marketing. And finally, watch the dog, not the label. This may be the most important principle of all. Owners are often trained to look outside the dog for certainty. They look at the front of the bag. They look at online opinions. They look at ingredient lists without context. They look at brand promises. But your dog is giving you all the data all the time. Their skin, their ears, their stool quality, any gases, if they're itching, their level of energy, and how quickly they recover after having a bad episode, their overall mood and their appetite, their tolerance to change. That is the real biological feedback. And if you ignore that because a product sounds impressive, you can miss what the body is telling you. So the framework is simple. Start with a stable base, maintain tolerance with structured rotation, support resilience with whole food diversity, reduce chronic inflammatory load, and watch the dog's response more closely than the labels promise. That is the system. And once you understand that system, feeding becomes less emotional and less confusing. You stop searching for one perfect food. You stop panicking every time a symptom appears. You stop treating every reaction like a mystery. And you start thinking the way biology actually works, not in isolated ingredients, not in marketing claims, in patterns, in tolerance, in resilience, in inputs and outcomes over time. That is the shift. If there is one thing I want you to take from this series, it is this. The healthiest diet is not the one with the best story. It is the one that helps your dog remain stable, adaptable, and resilient over time. That is the standard, not perfection, not trend compliance, resilience. If this series has helped you understand your dog's health more clearly, subscribe because the next phase, we're going to deeper into advanced root causes, including the gut-skin connection, microbiome disruption, environment triggers, and the hidden mechanisms behind chronic inflammation. Because once you understand the system, you can finally stop guessing.